Day 364 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzy here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine, and we'll start off with heading over to the Russian military losses. And currently, Russia is sitting on 145,060 Russian military personnel losses. And also in terms of hardware, that includes 8 tanks, and I'll show you a few of them soon, 7 APVs and 7 artillery. But we'll move back to the map now, where there's really been lots and lots going on. And I might just run the risk of blurting it all out now incomprehensibly, but I'll give you a few bits and pieces here today. So we'll start out on the map today where we've got a little bit more illegal Russian smoking. This time it's in Krasnoyarsk, which is really deep within central Russia. The map decides to cut off from there today, where a large warehouse lit up. Now I know that Russia performed quite a bit of military production, quite inland, just to be safe, but I couldn't quite confirm this one. Maybe someone just decided to do an insurance job on the place due to a slowing down economy. Then we'll move across to the Ukrainian Donbass, where it appears the updated strategic goals of the Russian Federation is to reach the administrative borders. So I'll zoom out and you can see them here, this white negative space, by March 31st now. So that's the current word going around. Although, unfortunately for Russia, that's around the very same time when Rasputitsa, the season of mud and slush, is working at its finest. So not a good time to expect a successful offensive for the Russian forces. So somehow Russia already forgot those harsh lessons from last year. Oh, coincidentally, that's the same time, that is the end of March, when a lot of NATO tanks should be making it to town as well. So quite the military melting pot it will be. Then more specifically in the Donbass, looking around the west of Crimea area, particularly in the forest region there are actually still large battles raging day and night at this location. And one of the outcomes from that in the southwest region of the forest was yet another T-90 tank, so a Russian T-90 tank that was destroyed by the Ukrainian forces. So that's the third one taken out in the past 4 days. And realistically, it's the best of what Russia has to offer for tanks. So that's not exactly things going to plan. Oh, and then let's just say quite eastern, so in the Russian-occupied region of the Donbass, pretty much anything in the Donetsk region in this darker red color, there's been quite the long-range strikes at military targets from the Ukrainian forces really deep within the Donbass over the last day or so. So much so that Russian Telegram channels, lots of them, are really largely speculating now that Ukraine has started to receive and use their GLSDB munitions. Now you might remember these ones, I'm quite excited about them. They're the ones that are 93 miles in range or about 150 kilometers in range, Boeing developed munitions. And Russia seems to suppose that it is these munitions that are being used because they're saying that it has this 93 mile or 150 kilometer radius of attack. But turns out Ukraine won't actually have these long-range munitions for many, many months still. And the strike range was actually a lot closer to 100 kilometers or 60 miles. So I believe this was something else up Ukraine's sleeve, about 30 strikes there, perhaps a coordinated strike of drones and HIMARS stationed really close to the front lines, but I'd really like to see some wreckage footage. But technically it doesn't even really matter what it was, because Russian forces are really quite up in arms now and sufficiently spooked and paranoid by what they perceive to be this really longer range strike capability that they have inevitably now started to speak about and look into push everything back even further. So HQs, depots, hubs, logistical lines, you name it, they're looking to push it right back, just as they needed to do when the HIMARS came out, or specifically the HIMARS 90-kilometer, 55-mile-ish range GLMRS munitions there came out back in June, July, August last year. And pushing everything back drastically reduces an army's capability to perform offensives, particularly when the invading force is looking to do just that, invade, instead of pulling back to further lines of defense. Then we'll move into the Bakhmut area, or really north of Bakhmut, so Yahidne. So that's where the battles really continue here. I would have shown you this one the other day, and if you go back in time, you'll see there was quite a salient push from the Russian forces, really just a bit of a protrusion out there, but then in the last couple of days, it's really been a lot of back and forth. Positions have been changing hands, similar to Crimea in a way that it's practically around the clock fighting as well here right now. And I should also point out, it's not all artillery shells from afar, battles from afar. For instance, in the east of Bakhmut, just a bit further south down there, in this region, there is actually some level of close quarters combat. And this one is of a photo of a Ukrainian soldier with an RPG, likely used for taking out nearby tanks or infantry fighting vehicles. Then, speaking of tanks and infantry fighting vehicles, in Avdiivka, so we'll move down to that one there, where 5 Russian BMPs and 1 T-72 tank were destroyed in a failed attempt to attack Ukrainian troops in the area. And Ukraine's Avdiivka fortifications have just been incredible for months and months right here now. Then we'll move down to Mariupol, where there was a Russian ammo dump hit in the last day, maybe the last day or two now. In fact, more than that, there were 10 coordinated strikes here alongside the others I just mentioned north to the east in the occupied area of the Donbass. And the additional strikes like these that really have some Russian mill bloggers in the area freaking out, like this one guy who was quite concerned and said, quote, "The enemy has definitely started something new." And if he means to say that Ukraine is taking back their land, which they've been doing almost since day one, well, yeah, Ukraine is starting something new. But on a more serious note, Russian telegrammers actually mentioned they're quite concerned that Mariupol will be one of Ukraine's next targets for liberation. Then I'll move across to some news for today. A little bit of a shorter video potentially, but starting out. So Putin made a speech to the Federal Assembly in Moscow in the last day. And as you might expect, it was really very much the expected narratives that Putin would normally push. For instance, like, quote, "The people of Ukraine have become the hostage of the Kyiv regime and its Western overlords." And he really just goes on and on, accusing the West of doing everything that he himself does, him and Russia, including, as he says, quote, "They distort historical facts." Something, by the way, that his Russian propaganda machine does all the time. And, even Russian mill bloggers were divided on the speech. So the ones that attended that had a Kremlin affiliation expressed neutral support for Putin's war in Ukraine, keyword neutral, perhaps out of fear for defenestration. But instead, the online Russian bloggers were pretty critical of Putin's war efforts, saying there was a complete lack of accountability in the military operation and that someone had to be held accountable. Even Igor Girkin, who is a supposed volunteer fighter taking arms for Russia in Ukraine, also announced his frustration at how Putin didn't say anything meaningful about the war. He also said that Putin omitted defeats, failures, problems, and the Russian economic downturn as well. Oh, and also that Putin didn't really announce any next objectives or how to counter Western sanctions. So not exactly a unified message coming out of Russia right now. Then in some other news, a US military aid package that was announced way back in December time, detailing JDAMs, which are guided munitions, has reportedly had an update in spec. So the US will reportedly now be sending the JDAM ERs, or the JDAMers instead, which stands for Extended Range, the ER. So these ones come with a modification for increased flight range of up to 72 kilometers or about 45 miles when air launched. And multiple JDAMs can be launched at the same time. And it would really be an important inclusion for Ukraine's upcoming offensives in the spring, particularly as Ukraine would receive these munitions in much higher volumes than, say, the HIMARS rockets, of which they're also about 30 times cheaper per unit than the HIMARS rockets. Then a few funnies to round off the day. There was so much more. I'll probably put them in other videos. I can't just spend a whole video doing funnies, unless you're okay with that. So starting off, there was an audio recording surfaced of Wagner boss and Droopy the dog wannabe, Prigozhin, just going on an exhaustive rant about his Wagner forces not getting ammo. He said he's losing his men in droves, which is quite an admission to make. He actually accused the Kremlin military chiefs of high treason. He also said Russian generals are snickering behind his back as they're not supplying him with the ammo that he needs. He said he's given up on appeals to the Russian MOD for more military shells. And what do you know, it's not just Russian civilians or Russian mobilized doing appeals, it's also private militia bosses now too. He also went as far as to say, quote, Wagner PMC doesn't seem to exist to the Russian Ministry of Defense. But long story short, his militia group has clearly been starved of ammunitions. It's not just some rumor that we've been saying for weeks. And perhaps he and his forces have been starved of those ammunitions because, well, perhaps for fear of him amassing too much political and military power for a potential political power grab, or at least so as Putin would think. Oh, and even Prigozhin posted on one of his social media channels a photo of a formal request he previously made to the Russian MOD requesting more ammo. Now, to post something like this publicly, he would have done something like this as more of a last resort as opposed to a first one, and done so in a likely attempt just to embarrass the Russian Defense Ministry, in a hope that they would start supplying him more military shells, artillery shells again, to Wagner again. So a ballsy move on his part. But isn't it funny, this political infighting, this in-faction fighting? So the part of Russia's military that seemed to have the most success, stripped of any capability to continue that success. Then in a bit of another funny, so Russia carried out a intercontinental ballistic missile test that actually appeared to have failed, all while Biden was meeting Zelensky in Kyiv the other day. So basically, I'll set you the scene. The US president is pretty much next door, so Russia decides to perform a bit of a muscle flex, or really at least attempted to perform one. You see, this is what happens when you have a tiny military budget that is made even tinier due to rampant corruption in the military system, eroding away the funding for pretty much everything, including nuclear arsenal maintenance. And this is really worth a mention, not normally in the funny section, so allow me to bore you for just one moment and say that when a nuclear arsenal isn't properly maintained, lots and lots of things can go wrong. Things that you might not even think of, such as the explosive charge that triggers the nuclear reaction could fail to ignite. The timing mechanism could malfunction, preventing the weapon from detonating at the intended time, which is quite crucial, or detonating at all. Also, there's the potential for electronic and mechanical failures from things like corrosion, fatigue, or exposure to radiation. That's a big one. Deterioration of the chemical composition for the igniting at the to set the thing off. And the problem here for Russia is that the vast majority of Russia's nuclear arsenal is old Soviet stuff, whereas the new stuff is, well, mostly a paper tiger. Then in a final funny, so remember the Putin address I've mentioned just earlier? Well, apparently it was so boring that one guy at the front row was falling asleep. Now I wonder what he was thinking. And it wasn't just the one guy, it was 8 or 9 other guys as well, including Medvedev himself. So I wouldn't blame some of these guys if they have just checked out mentally already. So thanks for watching, guys. Please leave a comment, subscribe, hit that like button. Again, thanks for all of your support. I should be back to the regular thing tomorrow and for the next 3, 4, 5, whatever days after that. And I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.